Welcome to the Dear NICU Mama podcast. This podcast is a safe place to connect with other NICU moms by listening to interviews with trauma-informed medical and maternal mental health experts, remarkable stories from the NICU, and intentional roundtable conversation. Our hope is that you feel like you're sitting across the table from another NICU sister and feel seen and validated in your experience. No matter where you are on your healing journey, this podcast is here to remind you that you are not alone. Welcome to the sisterhood.
Hi, beautiful mamas. It's Ashley here, co-host of the Dear NICU Mama podcast. And today we have a remarkable story of hope. I cannot wait for you guys to listen to this episode. Truly was so blown away at her courage and her resilience. And I just know that it's going to provide so much hope for so many of us, myself included. I did want to really briefly talk about our upcoming virtual fundraiser event that we have on July 28th, and it is called Walking Letter of Hope Day. I'm taking a minute to talk about it here in the beginning of the episode because due to some technical difficulties on my end, aka our Wi-Fi completely cutting out on me the last 10 minutes of the episode, our audio will sound a little funky, but I promise it'll be worth it to hear Daniela's words of hope. But Walking Letter of Hope Day is Dear NICU Mama's annual virtual fundraiser where we really have the opportunity to not only raise funds for Dear NICU Mama's programs and services, but also to celebrate this remarkable sisterhood. And so if you have not heard us talk about what it means to be a walking letter of hope before, this concept was really derived from our merchandise collections. And so Dear NICU Mama has over 9 merchandise collections, and each of those collections has a message or letter of hope. So when you wear that piece of merchandise, you become a walking letter of hope. And so on this day, we encourage moms in our community and families of the community to wear their merchandise, to wear it proudly, to take a 1-mile walk around their neighborhood or with friends. It's a great way to connect with other NICU moms. So if you join our private Facebook group, that's a way to see kind of where other moms are gathering. And it's also a way to raise funds for all of the work that we do. So Dear NICU Mama is a nonprofit. We are entirely run by the generosity of this community. And so it's really a day to talk about why Dear NICU Mama has been impactful for you. We also want to take a moment to thank one of the sponsors for this year's walk, and that is Gate City Bank. Their mission statement is to provide a welcoming atmosphere and commitment to making the lives of our customers and team members better by investing in them and their communities for a better way of life. Gate City Bank has been a proud sponsor of this walk for the past 2 years now, and we're so grateful for their partnership again this year. We will make sure to link in the show notes how you guys can connect with them further, but truly so grateful for their partnership in making this walk a success. So if you go to dearnicumama.com/hope, you can create your own fundraising team to really share about how Dear NICU Mama has impacted you and why you want to see Dear NICU Mama continue to move forward. So all that being said, this episode is completely worth your time. I'll make sure at the end to note where the audio gets a little funky, but truly just want to extend our gratitude to each and every one of you for being a part of this community, and we just cannot wait to celebrate with you on July 28th.
Happy Wednesday, beautiful mamas. We are officially through the middle of summer, which is absolutely wild. If you have children that are going to be in school or are school aged, we are all just like avoiding the Target aisles because it feels very, very real. Or maybe that's just me. But I can't believe it's already near the end of July. This summer has absolutely flown by, but we have a very special episode today. Aisha, do you want to introduce our guest?
Yes, I was just thinking, and maybe I should have asked you before, but Daniela, did we meet at a coffee chat or some sort of event, the Courage event a few years ago?
Yes, the Courage event, the virtual Courage event. Yes, we did.
Yes.
Yep.
So,
and you said something so important to me that had stuck with me since we had that event.
Aw, I can't remember,
That
but
was so beautiful.
I can share it. You had said, I was talking about the feelings that I had the first time I saw Mateo, and you said something like, you feel that way because what happened to you is so unnatural, and it is okay to feel that way because he was taken from you. And it is something that has stuck with me, and whenever I'm feeling down, I remember that, so that was like such a pivotal moment for me in my journey.
That just made me teary, but I'm so glad. Yes, well, I was remembering that because I do, Dear NICU Mama had done their, it was like their live event where we had, I think, Parijat was speaking as one of the keynotes, and then we had this breakout session, and I was on a little breakout session with Daniela, and that's like the first contact with her. And then we started following each other on socials, and like, again, shout out to Dear NICU Mama, because that's always been like the way that I've made all of these amazing friendships throughout the years. And the community, just like, I feel like I have so many friends now because of Dear NICU Mama that I just truly connect on a very deep level with. And so Daniela is one of those. And when we were talking about who we can have in on the podcast, I know she's been on our radar for probably over a year. So we're just so excited that we finally can make this episode happen. And like you said, she's a really big part of the sisterhood, and we're just really excited to have her on and hear her story, hers and Mateo's story. So Daniela, thank you so much for making the time and being on the podcast with us and sharing your story. We know it's very vulnerable, but we're just so excited to be able to hear from you, your journey, and I know it's going to provide so much hope and courage for so many moms listening today.
Thank you. And really am honored to be here. And like you said, I'm hoping that in sharing my story, I can give hope to other moms, just like me listening to podcast episodes has done for me.
So beautiful. Well, sweet Daniela, let's start at the very beginning. So we always like to kind of start at pregnancy. And so if you're comfortable sharing, what was your pregnancy like? And were there any signs that you would potentially have a NICU stay?
So we decided to start trying to have a baby in 2021, right after COVID. And we were fortunate. We got pregnant a couple of months later. Very easy pregnancy, some morning sickness, but, just super excited. A lot of the first time nervousness with like every little ache and pain. You think, oh my gosh, what's going on? Every time I called the doctor, he's like, you're fine. Every scan, you're fine. Stop. It really was like very easy pregnancy. I was like, I could do this over again. Like, no big deal. So I was very fortunate that all went well. I made it to 40 weeks, and then it was just like, okay, now we just wait and, see what happens. Yeah.
So everything is going well. What happened? What changed?
It was truly picture perfect. I went into labor on my due date, January 6th. It was, of course, the night of an impending snowstorm in the Northeast. And I had joked when I got pregnant and knew I was due in January. I said, watch, this baby's going to come in a snowstorm. I must have put it into the universe. So I went into labor. I was just having contractions. They were really frequent though. And I was like, I don't know, this just seems like it's a lot happening really fast. I don't know what to do. So I kind of waited a few hours, and I was also nervous, obviously, because there was a storm coming. So I said, you know what, let's go to the hospital. The worst thing is they say, you're not far enough along, go sit in the waiting room, or I'll go sit in the car, whatever, just to be close to the hospital. So I got to the hospital probably around 10, 11 at night. They did the exam. I was only 2 centimeters dilated, which typically they would send you home if you're that early on. But my blood pressure was slightly elevated. So I figured I was probably just nervous. So they said, let's just monitor you and let's see, because if it continues to be high, then we'll want to induce you to help speed the labor along and, get this baby out. So as they're monitoring me, they noticed that his heart rate was dropping with my contractions, but he was having a hard time recovering from my contraction. So it indicated there was some sort of distress happening. So they wanted to induce me. And that was the first thing that was not in my plan. I was like, I want this to be, natural. I don't want to be induced. I just want to wait. I was very, very unsure of what to do. I was calling my mom, calling my mother-in-law, calling anyone that I knew that had a baby. They were like, listen, you're at the hospital. The doctors know what they're talking about. Just, it's okay. It's not what you wanted, but just think about it, do what you think is best. So I decided, you know what, let me stay, let me go through with the induction. So I start the induction process. I was having contractions like more than every 5 minutes. Like it was like every 3 minutes, and it was all night. And I was just like, this is so brutal. So again, during my contractions, they would see that his heart rate was dropping and he was having a hard time recovering from the contractions. So there was a couple times overnight that like the nurses were rushing in, and I was like, okay, something's wrong. And then they were like, no, everything's okay. And then they would explain to me what was going on. So that was basically the whole night. It was like no sleep because something was going on. The next morning, I finally was like, I need an epidural. It's been 12 hours. I'm struggling. I'm going to need energy to push. So I get the epidural. And then after the epidural is when they break your water. So my doctor was there and he broke my water. And this was like the turning point because I just heard him go, meconium. But the way he said it, like I get chills. I could tell it was not good. And the nurse said to me, sometimes when there's meconium present, the baby has a hard time transitioning. And I'm just like, okay, like I'm in pain. It's been 12 hours. I don't, okay.
Yeah.
I kind of knew, like I knew what meconium was. So then after that, it was like I would try to be in one position. His heart rate would completely drop. I had to try another position. So it was like hours of figuring out how I could lay just so his heart rate would stay at an okay level. I had asked a couple of times, are we moving toward the C-section or, you know, what's the plan? And my doctor said would continue with vaginal delivery, which is what I had wanted. You know, obviously if things really take a turn, then we'll have to. But for now, this is what we're doing. So they were able to lay me on my left side, and that was the only position I could be in where his heart rate would stay somewhat level. And they said the cord was probably wrapped around his neck, which is what was causing the distress, perhaps will cause the meconium. Let's kind of just, you know, we'll wait and see what happens. Then I developed an infection. Now I have an infection. They put me on oxygen. They're pumping fluid to him, I guess, to try to help clear out the meconium. Still at this point, I didn't really know. I mean, they don't really even know what can happen. Meconium could be a little bit of suction, or it could be, you know, an intense NICU stay. So finally, it's go time. And I'm, you know, I push him out. They put him on my chest. And you could see right away that he wasn't breathing, like gasping for air. He's covered in meconium. And everyone's just like, come on, buddy, like trying to stimulate him and just get him to cry. And there's nothing. And I'll never forget the way he was looking up at me. And it's like that image is like burned in my brain forever. Just him looking like helpless. And he was on my chest for what feels like 5 seconds. It probably is what it was. And his color just totally started to change. So they took him right away and put him in the bassinet in the room. And the nurses are trying to work on him. And at that point, I was just like kind of blacked out, like hyperventilating, blacked out. And I just remember the nurse saying, remember what I said? Sometimes I have a hard time transitioning. And listen, he's okay. And you would hear a little bit of a cry once in a while, but nothing like what you expect to hear.
Yeah.
So my doctor's just focused on, you know, finishing me up. I remember seeing my husband pale as a ghost. My mom was also in the room during the delivery, and I just remember seeing her face. She was in complete shock. And then next thing we know, there's a code called to our delivery room, and it was the NICU team, like 20 nurses and doctors come rushing in. And it's just so chaotic, you know, you're like, I don't even know I can't process what's going on. And then it was just silent. And it was like that. You could hear a pin drop, silence in the room. and he was gone out of the room. And I will never forget, this is such a vulnerable thing to share, but I remember when he was gone, he didn't yet have a name. We had just found out that he was a boy. And I remember thinking, well, what is his name going to be? Because, like, what if he doesn't make it? What am I going to have to put on the tombstone? And that's like, I know that that's a feeling that other NICU moms have, and it is the worst feeling to have. Like, is this baby going to make it? I saw him for 5 seconds. Was that the only time I'm going to see him alive? That was really tough.
Yeah.
And I later found out that he was intubated within like 10 minutes of being born. Like, he was born at 5:51, and by 6 o'clock he was on a ventilator.
Oh my goodness. I literally got chills just right now listening because you are so right. That is such a unique experience to like have brought life into the world and instantly be confronted with the possibility of death.
Right.
That's something that you wish on no one, and to that be your very first experience after giving birth is just so, it's unimaginable. Thank you for sharing that, because I do think that many moms listening will definitely resonate with that. That's wild. So you had probably never even considered the NICU at all.
No. And funny enough, during my pregnancy, I was with one provider for like years, and I had my first sonogram, and something about it just didn't sit right with me, and I ended up switching providers. And it's one of those things where I now see was a blessing, because the hospital that I ended up delivering at was connected to like the best children's hospital, the best NICU that I could have been at.
Wow.
And so it was not something I thought about, but now with friends that are having babies, I say, make sure you check the NICU.
Yeah.
And, you know, what kind of NICU is it? What technology do they have? Because you just never know. And I really am fortunate that he was there. But yeah, it was not, I had not thought about NICU. The only full-term babies I knew that were in NICU had like blood sugar issues, and they were there for, you know, a day. It was never any thought about an extended NICU stay.
Yeah, sure. And so, because also typically when you, like, the only other reason you would have any like contact with the NICU team even is because things are not going well. And so you have a team come in and talk to you beforehand. You didn't have that. You delivered, they came in, you hadn't had a conversation with the NICU team prior to that.
Right. No, it could be, and I just might have blocked it out, that they might have said something like, baby might need the NICU, but I really honestly don't remember. And I think that's one of those things you just are so like in it that you have no idea what's going on.
So when was the first time you talked to someone from the NICU and they kind of explained, this is what's happening?
So it wasn't until a few hours later. So I gave birth to him at like 5:51, and I remember just waiting and waiting and waiting, and I was getting so angry because I'm like, what's going on?
Just wanted an update.
Right. And one of the nurses said, honestly, you'd rather the doctors be there working on him than here talking to you. And I was like, you're right. So a few hours later, the neonatologist came down and he explained what was going on. He said he had meconium aspiration syndrome, which leads to pulmonary hypertension. And he had inhaled so much meconium that he wasn't able to breathe, which is why he was on a ventilator. But he said he's the sickest baby in the NICU. And this was also during COVID, where my husband had tested positive for COVID. And so going into labor, I knew he wasn't going to be able to stay with me. Then the NICU happened, and the doctor said, Dad, you tested positive. Typically, you wouldn't be able to see the baby for 14 days. You're telling me he's the sickest baby in the NICU, and I'm not going to be able to see him for 14 days. there's no way this baby's going to make it if I'm not there. And he did say, we are escalating it because we do really think that, Mom, you need to be there. And that was kind of like, oh boy, this is serious. And he explained it's going to be an extended NICU stay. I had asked, do we know if there was any like brain damage? Like, how long was he without oxygen? And he said they wouldn't know until they did an MRI or a brain scan to see if there are any brain bleeds. So we were kind of not sure what was going to happen. So at that point, I wasn't going to be able to see him. My husband couldn't stay with me. I was waiting for my postpartum room, and I then asked for my mom to stay with me because when I was like, well, I don't want to be alone, and I wasn't able to have her stay either.
Oh,
so
Gosh.
So I had to just go into postpartum by myself, and I really felt defeated at that point. Like, I can't see the baby. He's so sick. What am I going to do? And I'll never forget my mother-in-law, God rest her soul, because we lost her this year. She was the one who said to me, you need to advocate and you need to fight to see that baby. She needs you. He was in you for 9 months. He needs you. You need to figure out a way. And she was the reason that I, like, overnight, middle of the night, I'm calling the NICU. I'm calling anyone that will listen to me. I'm like, you need to let me see this baby. And thankfully, one of the head nurses, she was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. I had tested negative. My husband had already been so many days out of COVID. They were like, okay, you can come on Sunday. He was born on a Friday. He was born Friday
but
night.
you still had to wait 2 days to even meet him?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, Daniela, that is like...
I know.
That is like
Yeah.
Like my mama heart right now is like broken.
I know.
Like, that is devastating.
Yeah. So she goes, okay, you can come Sunday. So I go, so 12:01 a.m. I can come? And she's like laughing. She goes, no one's ever asked that. I'm like, you bet I will be there at 12:01 a.m. on Sunday. So
Well, can I ask one question? I'm sorry. I'm just like a little bit like in shock that to even like see. So had you seen a picture? Had a nurse come and shown you like, hey, I mean, what type of introduction had you had before you met him? Was there any?
So the first night, I really did not hear anything. And what I found out after the first 12 hours, so like 5 o'clock in the morning, my doctor actually came into my room. He sat down and I could tell it wasn't good. And he was like, he's not doing well. He's really struggling. They called for ECMO to be on standby. And he explained to me what ECMO was. And he was like, basically life support. So I'm just giving you the update. And then he goes, I'm really sorry this happened. And my heart, as much as I was grieving, my heart almost broke in that moment that my doctor was apologizing. And I knew it wasn't his fault. Like, these things happen, you know, these are freak birth things that happen. And so he was explaining all that to me. And it was sometime around the time that my doctor was talking to me that Mateo, all of a sudden, like, things started clicking for him. Because I know now from reading his hospital records, like, all of a sudden he just started responding to medication. And like everything just kind of started to like level out for him. So he had been unstable for the entire night, which is why I really hadn't heard anything. I think I had called one from overnight and they just were like, they're working on him. Like,
So you didn't see like a picture or anything though?
The next day, once he was stable, they FaceTimed me. So I could see him through the iPad. And like, I'm pumping. The nurse is like showing him me an iPad. And it's so uncomfortable because you're like, what, do I talk to him? Like, he's sedated. His eyes are covered. His ears are covered. All I hear is that he was on that high frequency ventilator. So it's like vibrating and it's so loud. And I'm just like, hi, buddy. And you just feel so weird because you don't know what to do. And the nurse is explaining all of the things. I'm trying to take notes on my phone. I don't understand any of the medical jargon. And I'm talking to him through an iPad, his first day of life. And you're like, this is the weirdest thing. I could never have imagined that this would be life right now. Alone in a hospital bed,
Alone. That's the other part.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, that was really killer. That's something I wish in hindsight that I spoke up for myself more, because that's something that has stuck with me about just that feeling of being alone. And like, I was in such shock. I remember being on the phone with a friend and she was like, "Oh, you look like you're doing well. Like you're not crying." In hindsight now, I'm like, that's because I was in shock and I had I had no other way of coping with it besides laughing through, my life in that day. But I do wish that I pushed for a support person, because I think I mean, even getting out of bed, like I just gave birth and I had to go use the bathroom and I had to get myself out of bed.
No.
No.
Well, and that's the hard, man, like anytime that we talk with moms that gave birth during COVID specifically, is like, just nobody knew what was okay or not, like we were all still having this like huge global pandemic thing lurking over our heads. And so I'm sure for you too, you were like, I don't want to expose my super sick baby to potentially any sort of illness or virus. And so to have grace on yourself in that moment too, because like there was just this impending like virus everywhere and nobody knew like what was okay, what was allowed, what wasn't allowed. And so it makes sense that you were like, okay, I'm just gonna get through this by myself for the next couple of days until I can meet him. Although, man, I wish you would have had somebody. I wish they would have that is like devastating to be alone. And so, because your husband too, he didn't have the FaceTime opportunity. So what was how was he processing all of this alongside you?
Yeah, from what we've just talked about after the fact, once I was more okay, I asked him what it was like for him. And he said he went home that night. He was like, I just opened the door and I collapsed and I just was sobbing on the floor. He's like, I came home to an empty house. You weren't there. There's an empty bassinet. And that was like, again, it wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't how it was supposed to be.
No.
So he had a very, very hard time with it as well. It was hard. It was really hard. He held it together for me and in front of me. And I will always say, like, I'm so grateful for what he did in it. And I think part of it for him was also the shock and just the adrenaline, like, go, 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 like, we got to do this. And he really gave me the space to do what I needed to do and to heal and to spend as much time as I needed to in the NICU. And he was able to just pick up all the other things that needed to get done for us.
Yeah. Well, I just want to like reiterate, because it is very, the NICU experience is already a very isolating experience. And then on top of that, you guys were literally removed from each other. Like everyone was isolated physically from each other. And that just how that exacerbates the whole, like, I just can't even imagine. Like as it is, it's so isolating. And so then to physically have to be separated from each other,
the first time that we were ever together with him in the NICU was the day he was going home, because they weren't allowing both parents at the same time.
My gosh.
So it kind of makes me sad we never got a picture of both of us with him in the NICU. But the last day they bent the rules a little bit and they were like, no, it's okay. You can both go in there. Enjoy the time together in here.
Wow.
In hindsight, I can't believe how much time we spent apart. I think we saw each other at night for a couple hours to sleep. And we had one nurse who we were both there all the time. Like I would be there. My husband would go in the morning from like 5 to 8. Then I would go from like 8 to 5. And then he'd go again in the evening. And then he'd come home for a few hours to sleep. And one nurse said to me, you two need to spend time together. I know it's so hard, but once the baby goes home, you're really not going to have any time to do anything. So she was like, go do something together. And she was so right. We ended up going on like a little lunch date. We went to Marshall's or Home Goods, like bought some things for the baby. And just to have those 2 hours to reconnect was so important. And I myself never would have thought to do it. And you feel so guilty thinking like, how can I leave my baby to go do something for myself? But it really was so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, and it speaks to like it's a sacrifice, right? You had sacrificed so much throughout this experience, time together as a family, like all of those little sacrifices along the way. They're so hard to make, right? They're because you want, like, selfishly, you want to just like screw all the rules. Like, I just want to be with, together. And so like to make all of those little decisions that were very sacrificial in order to allow the best outcome. I mean, that it's not easy. So I really, I'm just in awe because I can imagine how hard that must have been to just continually have had to just make those decisions for your family. So oh my gosh, that's crazy.
It was nuts. It was pretty in hindsight, when
you described it well. It was nuts.
Yep.
Oh, just absolutely. So if we can go back a little bit, so 12:01 on Sunday. Do you have the opportunity to meet him, and what was it like to officially be able to see him and meet him?
So to add to the craziness of it all,
I'm nervous.
I set my alarm for like 11:50 p.m. Like, I'm gonna get up, I'm gonna get myself dressed, I'm gonna go to the NICU. It wasn't even a thought in my mind that I should ask someone to wheel me there. I just gave birth 24 hours ago, 30 hours ago.
You are such a mama bear, though.
Right?
Yeah.
Seriously,
Love it.
I got lost along the way, cried. I ended up in like the cardiac unit. They're like, "Ma'am, do you need help?" Yeah, there's. Oh my gosh! Like, can you see a bracelet? Like, I'm just trying to get to the NICU. I just need to go see my son,
my baby.
Yeah, look, have milk with me. I promise.
Oh, you're carrying milk?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love you.
Waddling my way there.
You are my hero.
So I finally get there, probably like 12:30, and I walk in, and he was in a really dark room with a sign on the door that was like, "Please keep simulation down." And so I walk in, and I introduce myself to the nurse, and they check your bracelet, and it's just like, it's such a weird feeling because it's so dark. It's just, there's so many machines. There's all this beeping going on. And there he is. He's sedated. She called it his little superhero mask over his eyes, then his little earmuffs for the noise. And I'm watching his chest, like, literally look like he's vibrating because of the ventilator. And the nurse was like, "I'll give you a minute with him." And so I'm just looking at him, and I remember sharing this at our virtual event that I felt really disconnected because I was like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I can't pick him up. All you want to do when you have your baby is pick them up and hold them.
Yeah.
I'm talking to him, but like, obviously I know he's not going to respond. And she's like, "We talk to him, like, he knows that you're here. He can sense that you're here." And I remember rubbing his head, and the nurse stopped me, and she was like, it's too stimulating for him when you rub his head. Just gently put your hand on his head. And in that moment, I was so angry because, like, what do you mean you know my son better than I do?
Yeah.
But, she knew medically that it was causing him to be more, aroused, or it wasn't good for him. So I kind of just stayed there and just stood over his bassinet for like, I feel like hours, just keeping my hand on his chest. And then the doctor came in and explained to me what was going on. I mean, there was so much. It's his lungs are not working on their own, so he has to be on this ventilator that's keeping them basically open because they were so inflamed and filled with so much meconium that basically his air sacs couldn't open and close on their own. They were just getting stuck because of the meconium. So they have to keep him on this ventilator. He has to have the medication that's going to help, the medication for the blood pressure, keeping him sedated. And anyone that I met that first night was like, he is a fighter. He is a fighter because we were really worried what was going to happen that first night that he was admitted, that he was that baby in the NICU. And, you're looking around at like the preemies, so that's typically what you think of with NICU. And you're like, hey, that's crazy that my full-term baby is the sickest one here. It's just something you just don't expect to happen.
Yeah, right. Oh my goodness.
Well, and had you named him yet?
Yeah, when he was admitted to the NICU, so probably about an hour after I gave birth to him, when we kind of like settled a little bit, that's when we decided on his name. And we were saying, okay, he has to have a really strong name. What is it going to be? He's a fighter. He has to have a strong name.
Yeah.
And that's how we ended up with Mateo.
Oh.
And his middle name is Rocco, which was my husband's dog's name. My best friend was that dog. So we had to give him that middle name. That dog was a fighter too, because he got sick and was only supposed to live, I think, 6 months, and he went on 4 years being sick. So Mateo has a very strong name.
Very
Yes,
fitting.
he does.
Wow, what a journey. So how long was Mateo in the NICU?
He was in total in the NICU for 4 weeks. So he was on a ventilator the first 5 days. And I remember initially they were like, oh, usually 2 to 3 days. And then 5 days later, they were like, okay, he's finally ready. So they took him off the ventilator to put him on CPAP. And I remember the day that I was going into the NICU, and they had told me that morning they were extubating him. And I remember walking down the hall, and I heard a baby crying. And I was like, that's him. I know that's him.
Wow.
And it's still crazy that I just had a feeling it was him. And I like ran down the hall. I barreled through everybody, barreled to the nurses. And there he was, eyes open on CPAP. And it's like, it's such a beautiful feeling, and it's so crazy. I'm like, wow, 5 days later, I finally hear my baby cry, and I finally see his eyes open. And so he was on CPAP for a while. It took him some time to transition off of it. There was a couple of trials. They tried to take him off, but he struggled with it. He wanted to eat so bad, but it was hard for him because when they're on CPAP and trying to drink from a bottle, it's just a lot. So it was kind of like a lot of trial and error. And then there was a nurse who, towards the end of his care, she was the one who said, you know what, he might need LASIK to help just clear out the final little bit of fluid that's in his lung. And sure enough, he went on LASIK for like 3 days. And after that, he was like on Optiflow for a day or something. I was able to start breastfeeding him, which was what I had wanted to do.
Yeah.
So that was a really beautiful thing to be able to do that in the hospital. And then after that, it was just like, he was great, and then all of a sudden one day you walk in and my husband and I were doing our changing of the guard. And he's like, he's going home tomorrow. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, that's it, he's going home tomorrow. I'm like, what? Because I think past like the 3-week mark, I was just like, whenever it happens, it happens. I'm not going to try to, I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to keep thinking maybe it's tomorrow. It will happen when it happens. And so to get that news, and it was right before his 1 month, those little things that you miss out on so much when you're in the NICU, that you really look forward to those things that maybe you wouldn't have thought twice of if you weren't a NICU mom.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I want to go back to something that we briefly touched on, which is just this feeling of connecting with Mateo. And so was there a point in your NICU stay where you felt like that connection started to be built, or did you feel like that was something that was built once you were home? Because we hear it both ways from moms, so there's no right or wrong way.
I think once he was off the ventilator and on CPAP, where he was not sedated anymore, I started to feel like I could bond with him in a way because there was more of that interaction. Everyone reminded me, and the nurses, even when he was sedated, they were like, he knows that you're here. He knows that you're here. But it's so hard because, you're not getting feedback in a way from the baby. And we do know it is so important for moms to be there. But just for yourself, it's so hard. So once he was more interactive and I could see, like, when I was coming into the room, I would see him turn his head to look at me. That's when I started to feel like, okay, he knows I'm his mom. Or I started to just feel more of that connection. And that also came with it being much harder to leave at night because
Of course.
leaving him at night, I'm like, oh, no, I can't be with him. What if he wakes up and he needs something,
Yeah.
It kind of just became our norm at that point. Like, he's got all these tubes. I'm just going to scoop him up with his tubes and hold him on my chest. And the nurses would joke, like, oh, you're a pro at this. And then leaving the NICU and coming home, it's like another transition and finding connection in another way. So you get so used to this routine. It almost, I'm sure this was also part of like a coping thing for me. It started to feel like a job almost, where I would think to myself, oh, I'm doing my shift right now. Like, I'm going for my 8 to 5 shift. And that was my job, was to go and take care of my baby, and then the nurses would take care of him, and then I would do it again the next day. But once I got home, it was like, oh, now I have these 24 hours that I can spend with him and bond with him.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe then to pick up at that point, so he comes home from the NICU, you start to kind of like establish life at home together. How were some of those initial days, and, how did you begin to really process, like, oh my gosh, for 30 days, we were just in isolation? Like, what was it like to come home, and how did you begin to process your experience?
So one of the things that sticks out to me is that when he was in the hospital, I would sit in his room in the nursery chair, and that was my pumping place. And it was so depressing at first because you're like, the baby's supposed to be here, but it kind of just became my norm. And so when he was home, I used that place almost like a healing spot for healing, because I was able to then sit with him in that chair. And I started to write a lot, and I started writing notes to him, just like in my phone when he was sleeping on my chest or nursing him. I would just write notes to him, and I found that I started to write his story a lot. And now, even looking back, I see that I've written it like 5 or 6 times, like across 3 or 4 months. I would just constantly rewrite the story of his birth, and it's like each time I emphasize something different. And I think that was part of my healing, and that was something that really helped me heal tremendously. It wasn't until like his first birthday that it was really hard for me. I was really lucky, though, that I had found Dear NICU Mama when I was actually in the hospital. It was like a Sunday night, and I was scrolling through Instagram, and I ended up coming across one of the Sunday letters, and I remember reading it and the way that somebody wrote something, I was like, oh my God, they wrote exactly what I'm feeling. And it was something along the lines of grief and joy coexisting. So being home and doing a lot of my own writing, I really leaned on those letters and reading through those letters to see what other moms were saying, and listening to the podcast and just hearing what other moms had to say. Those were all things that helped me start to process what I was going through. And then, like I said, especially around his first birthday was when I knew going into the season, I had a feeling it was going to be hard for me. Like, as soon as the months started to get cold, because he was born in January, like, I had a feeling this was going to be a time of high anxiety for me.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting that. But then in reading some of what the other moms were writing in the Facebook group, I'm like, oh, a lot of people experienced it.
Yeah.
It was surprising to me, but also such a relief to know that I wasn't alone in those feelings.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, and I don't know. I know that since then, you have welcomed your second baby, and I'm sure that there has been so much redemption in that story as well. But I wanted to maybe move on to talking a little bit about, you've touched on it a little bit about like the support that you received through Dear NICU Mama, but I wanted to know, how else did you find support in this season, right? Of reaching milestones and anniversaries with Mateo, finding out you were pregnant again, and then going through a second pregnancy and delivery. How was your support system there? How were you processing all of that?
I know I spoke about my husband in the NICU, and I will sing his praises when it comes to support, because when I could cry even thinking about it. But when that first birthday came around, I remember one night, just like something about the dark of the room sent me into this flashback. The first night that I came home from the hospital without Mateo, and I had like a full-blown panic attack. And I just remember my husband hugging me and just being there for me, not saying anything, but just being there. And he was the first person that said to me, what you experienced is trauma. And for someone to label it was such a relief, because you're like, okay, there's a reason why I feel all these things. And he just gave me the space to feel what I needed to feel. He understood that what I was going through. Finding friends who maybe didn't experience the NICU, but just have that, and that could be empathetic towards you, was so important for me. And just being able to know who I could turn to, not the people that were going to say, oh, but he's fine now. Because that's the last thing you ever want to hear. You're like, I know they're fine, but there's just so much that I went through and I need to talk to someone. So having the support system, the ones that I knew I could lean on when deciding about having a second, it was not something I could even think about in Mateo's first year. Like,
of course.
Hysterical. There was no way I could even talk about it. After his first birthday, it was when I kind of started to be like, okay, maybe I could do this. And when I found out I was pregnant, I was home with Mateo when I took the pregnancy test, and I just had a feeling that I was pregnant. And I remember seeing it was positive, and I started sobbing, and I was just hugging him. And I was so excited and so nervous, and I felt so guilty all at the same time, because I'm like, how am I going? Like, I didn't get time with him in the beginning, and now I'm going to have less time with him. Like, how am I going to do this? And I was incredibly nervous about that. And I was also incredibly nervous.
I really appreciate when you shared the guilt of, you had felt like your time with Mateo had been robbed at the beginning, and then also feeling like, now with the second, how am I going to do that, right? How am I going to split myself now into two, right? I think that was a very unique perspective that I do also think it will resonate a lot with moms who are experiencing their second pregnancies after a NICU stay. Like, that feeling of, it's unfair for my NICU baby, that already went through so much, and I already had time robbed from me with him, to then add another So I really appreciated you mentioning that, because I do also think that will resonate a lot with moms who are going through something similar.
And then you also feel guilty for feeling that way for the second baby.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
the mom guilt is never ending. But I will say now, being 5 months postpartum, I learned how to balance it. And like, I do still get that time with him. Maybe it takes a little bit of a different effort, but you still get that time with him, and you still get that time with the baby.
Yeah.
You find a way to make it work.
Yeah.
And like you used the word redemption before with the birth, and that is truly what I feel like my birth with Zara was. It was my redemption, because I remember leaving the hospital and I felt empowered, which was such an opposite feeling of what I had with Mateo, because I feel like I advocated for myself more, and it was everything that I had wanted the first time, that just because of circumstance I didn't get, but having it this time, it was like, I can do this. Like, my body, I deserve to give birth. I didn't do anything wrong. And in a way, it's like you said, it was a redemption. And, I do wish that I had felt that way about myself before I gave birth, but it's kind of a beautiful thing that I had a daughter, and I'm excited to share that with her one day, to know like you gave me hope and you gave me this feeling of empowerment.
Yeah.
So sweet.
Beautiful. I think you share about your journey so beautifully, Daniela, and it's just so evident of the intentional hard work that you've done to heal. There's a couple things that really strike me as courageous. Specifically, like when you came home was actually, well, you were in the NICU too, but the first was pumping in his nursery. I think that took incredible amounts of courage and vulnerability, because that can feel like a very eerie place to be, right? Like, my baby's supposed to be here. I think it was incredibly courageous that you pumped in his room while he was in the NICU. Like, picturing that makes me emotional. And then to have that moment where he's in your arms in that same nursery chair was incredibly courageous. Like, what a beautiful, vulnerable, full circle moment.
Yeah.
But then when you talked about how you wrote your story, I think that took incredible amounts of courage. And I think it was really beautiful how you wrote it to him, and how you will forever now share his story with him. You'll have those to look back on. But I think for some of us, it takes us years to really feel safe enough to do that. And so I really just want to just commend how courageous it was to really just begin writing that out, especially when it was so fresh, and to write it in kind of that letter form to him. And so those were a couple of moments, I mean, a million moments throughout your journey where I was stricken by your courage, but I think those specifically just took a lot of intentional healing, intentional courage, intentional bravery. And I think the way that you share your story now is a reflection of that. And so I just want to really commend you. And I just feel so grateful that Dear NICU Mama could be a part of that in your life. And I think it's just really beautiful, too, to have moms that write these letters know how other moms receive them. Because even to this day, I'm 5 years out and I'll read a letter sometimes and I'm just like, whoa, like, this is so healing and so timely and so beautiful. But truly, from the bottom of our heart, it just truly means the world to have you part of Dear NICU Mama. And not only to share your story like this, but your story brings so much hope to other moms, and it's been evident. And so really just an honor and a privilege to know you, and just to have you a part of this community. So we love you very dearly.
Thank you.
And so we would love to know, what does being a walking letter of hope mean to you? Like, when you think about what that means, like, we say that phrase often, like, you are a walking letter of hope. Like, what does that mean for you?
For me, walking letter of hope means a couple of different things. It's acknowledging where you were and how far you've come. And I think it's recognizing that you don't have to walk around with a smile on your face because your baby's home and happy now, or your baby's healthy. It's okay to still be sad about it and still grieve the things that you didn't get to have or those experiences lost, but to look at it and think about how much you've both grown. Like, I think a lot of times we look at our babies and we say, wow, I can't believe they went through that. I can't believe that they're thriving. You know, it's amazing what they went through. But I think as moms, we have to look at ourselves and say, wow, I can't believe I went through that too. But to just recognize how far as a mom you've come. You've had to do unimaginable things, and you've had to trust strangers to care for your baby. And you know, whether you're a month out of the NICU, years, whatever, just to think about you got through that. Right? Like, that's amazing to be able to get through it. And I know that Dear NICU Mama, one of those quotes is, there is goodness ahead. And it's so true. And so when you can get to a point where you can recognize, wow, there is so much life outside of NICU, that I think is a true embodiment of being a walking letter of hope.
Okay, friends, this is where my audio completely cuts out, but I still think what Aisha and Daniela have to say is super valuable. So I will leave this with you. It might sound a little funky, but definitely worth your time. So stay tuned.
Well, and this is your second year participating in like Walking Letter of Hope, or is this your third? This is your third year.
Third year.
Oh my goodness. That's crazy. And
yeah,
a little before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about just how blown away you have been by your family and friends who have donated, because you do a fundraiser in honor of Mateo. Can you talk a little bit about that whole experience of like deciding to start a fundraiser, and then just the support that you received, and how that made you feel?
The first year that I participated in Walking Letter of Hope Day, Mateo was about 6 months old. And I had done the Mother's Day card outreach that year because it was part of healing for me, was to be able to participate in that. And I remember thinking, this fundraiser is a way for me to help give back to Dear NICU Mama that has given me so much. And I started with, like, I think a small goal. I was like, all right, we'll see. We'll raise some money. Great. Like, even if it's $20, awesome. And I think we ended up raising like $700 or something the first year. And I was in like a really short time. And I was just blown away. Like, wow, people really love us. They love me. They love our family. And so many people were messaging me saying, wow, this sounds like a really amazing organization. And I'm like, you have no idea. It has been my therapy. It has been my sisterhood. It has been my healing. And then the next year I was like, well, I have to do this again. This is like my annual event. And I remember like getting some like hundreds of dollars of donations from people that we knew, and people that I wasn't even necessarily close to, but just were sharing it on social media, donating. Or I had old coworkers who now have grown children who were reaching out and saying, my son was a NICU baby 30 years ago. Like, I wish Dear NICU Mama was around then. And it really showed me how, by me sharing Dear NICU Mama and sharing the fundraiser, it was reaching more people. There was somebody that I know who, she had a friend who became a NICU mom, and so she had said, I'm going to share this with her because I want her to just see like what support system is out there. And every year that I do it, I am just blown away at the donations that come in and just the support for us and just for supporting the organization to really help move the mission forward. It blows me away every year. And it's just like, it makes me cry every time, because I can't believe that, people, it's so nice to see people being so generous with something that is probably really unfamiliar for them. Like, fundraisers for a lot of things that people are more aware of. But, NICU moms is not something that people come across often. So just to see it getting attention from family and friends is like,
well, I was going to say it's probably
incredibly
validating of your own experience, right? To have people recognize and see you and what you've lived through.
Yeah. People have said, and you like one of those humbling things when people have said, you're the strongest mom I know. And you're kind of like, oh, shucks, thank you. But yeah, it is really validating to hear. You're like, yeah, I did have to be really strong. I did have to be really courageous. You're right. And I am going to take that compliment. I think about this and I think about myself now. And if I could talk to myself sitting in that NICU chair, what would I tell myself? So the first thing I would say is breathe, because you're running on adrenaline. You're running on like no sleep, because even if you're trying to sleep, you're so stressed. Just breathe, because you are doing something that you never expected to do. Nothing can prepare you for this, whether you anticipate a NICU stay or not. You're doing unimaginable things. And it is okay to just take a moment and breathe and recognize that this is really hard. And it's really hard. And it's going to feel hard. And some days are going to be easier and some days are going to feel a lot worse. And I think of a NICU stay I almost think of it as like a really deep wound. So I think when you're in it, it's like that initial shock of that really, really deep wound where you don't feel anything because you're just in such shock. And then eventually, it heals, or like you take care of it in whatever way, but you always have a scar. And like when you look at that scar, it tells the story. So it'll never go away, but it won't sting as much. And it might not feel like that. And I know for myself, like, for months, I would rack my brain trying to figure out what went wrong and reading medical records that were thousands of pages and like, what can I do differently next time to make sure it doesn't happen? And then eventually I just got to a place of saying, you know what, I have to just let that go. Like, it is part of our story. The scar will always be there, but there is so many beautiful things that have happened since then. And life really will be beautiful after NICU.
Oh, Daniela, thank you. Thank you so much for just your wisdom and your heart and your vulnerability. I feel like you, like Ashley was saying, you share so beautifully your journey. And I know that it is because you have taken the time to really honor it. And I just know that this is going to be, I think, so many of the things that you said, there's going to be a mom on the other side of this, listening and feeling less alone because of what you shared today. So thank you so much for your time and your heart to share your story with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And like you said, I hope that somebody listening hopefully finds something that just resonates with them. I know for me, plenty of times I have listened, and recently, I think it was Trish was talking about the sandwich, the Panera sandwich, and I sobbed because the night that I gave birth to Mateo, after all of the craziness, I just kept going, where's my sandwich? Where's my sandwich? And the only picture I have from the night he was born is of my turkey sandwich. And I was like, oh my gosh, somebody else just cared about their sandwich.
That is awesome.
Oh, you're like, and so many little things that happen that you think you're the only one, and you hear someone else say something, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone.
Yep. Yeah. No, even me listening to your story, there were so many things that you said that I literally was like, oh my goodness, this is like my story. This part is like my story. I know that it's gonna be a hope-filled episode to listen to. We're just so grateful and we thank you for for being here and for being part of the sisterhood.
Thank you so much for listening to the Dear NICU Mama podcast. If you loved this episode, we'd be so grateful for a review.
For more ways to connect with the Dear NICU Mama sisterhood, check out the links in the episode description.